and Jerusalem Avenue. We will cross Jerusalem Avenue just right now, and when you look to your left hand side, you may see this hidden partly behind the clouds Palace of Culture and Science. Very famous souvenir from Soviet Union for Poland, unusual gift our country received in the beginning of 50s. It's unusual because it's a gift for which we had to pay. So not everyone would be very happy of having such a gift. A number of buildings were crushed to create this Palace of Culture exactly in the center of the city. So this zone, this plot you can see to the left, is exactly heart of Warsaw. Building itself is a seat of theaters, cinemas, galleries, museums, different cultural and intellectual circles and institutions. So exactly Palace of Culture and Science, just on the other side.
I was not sure, but that's what I thought.
On the other side of this building, there's a huge concert place that's called Congress Hall. It's a place where, for example, Rolling Stones gave their first concert in Europe during this Central Europe, during this period of socialism. Everything behind the palace, so when we still keep looking to the left, it's that modern, looking very fancy, very fresh commercial side of Warsaw, very frequently called Polish Manhattan. It's that side of the city that was part of a Jewish quarter of the ghetto as well during the Second World War. So this is mainly why a lot of buildings here are typical for modern architecture or for the socialist architecture, as really big part of the city, 1/5 that was part of the ghetto, was completely flattened. Building after building, street after street. Nazis had to get rid of all of the evidence of their work by May 1943. This is until when ghetto of Warsaw existed, until when actually Jewish tradition was fighting for surviving. It is quite important subject, and there is a lot about the Jewish tradition in the city. I know it's only a couple of hours you spend in Warsaw, but I hope this short stay will make you feeling that Warsaw would be a good place for example, at least weekend break. So I really encourage coming here and uncovering all of these historical mysteries of the city, visit number of museums we've got here, and getting to know, bringing much closer amazing history of Warsaw. We will touch a bit of city's history in a moment because we will be turning right into the King's Street. Warsaw is always a very surprising place. Just a second ago a car wanted to become a tram, but the driver did not manage, so we'll be chasing him. We will be driving along the park, green zone, that's called Saxon Garden, which is kind of gate to old Warsaw, to historical city, historical part of the city, and we are driving along the Street of Kings. This is officially name of the street. That was direct entrance to Warsaw, actually way to the royal castle for newly elected kings, as for many centuries, many years, throne of Poland was elected. So we had kings from all around Europe, starting with Lithuania, Hungary, Germany, Russia, Romania, France, that was Sweden. That was all bringing quite strong influence on all these different cultures. So driving along the King's Street, we are getting to the Marshall Square, and this empty space to our left-hand side is a square where we celebrate all national holidays. Two very important monuments are here. When you turn behind your left arm, you will see three arches, a kind of arcades. That's a tomb of a known soldier, one of the most important memorial that's commemorating all battlefields where Poles used to fight for our tradition, for our history, for our identity. It is also a place where Pope John Paul II gave the first Mass during his first pilgrimage to homeland in summer 1979, and exactly from the place you can see that cross. It's just to our left, in the middle, in the very center of the square. We're passing this cross right now. He blessed Poland and he gave special speech that encouraged, very unusual speech that encouraged the whole Polish nation to do something with our life and to went out on the streets, demonstrate this willing of freedom. So this square reminds a lot about this amazing personality, like Pope John Paul II was, of course. We keep driving and we're passing from the Marshall Square to the Theatre Square that will appear just in 1 minute, in 1 second actually. The building to our left-hand side is a huge, very huge, monumental, very representative center of culture of the city. The Grand Theatre, created to design of Antonio Corazzi, Italian architect in the beginning of 19th century, until today is one of the largest theatre stage in Europe. Probably La Scala in Milan would be the only bigger than the stage of Warsaw's Grand Theatre, which is also house of the School of Ballet, Opera House. It's a really important cultural place. Of course, destroyed and rebuilt after World War II damages, as most of the representative buildings. For example, building to the right, that was a town hall of the city by 1939, that was also rebuilt. Really big part of the city was reconstructed, rebuilt, basing on the paintings that were made by Italian artist Canaletto, who was printing, making panoramas of the city, putting all tiniest details on his works. That was the only example of city's architecture that survived damages of Second World War, and the only what helped us to rebuild the city when war was finished. It was very tough because big parts of Warsaw were completely flattened, like the ghetto. Very big parts of the city were full of rubbles after the uprising of Warsaw 1944, and there were no people to work here, as there were only 200,000 survivors of more than 1.5 million people that lived in Warsaw before the war. So to start new life in the city, it was very difficult, especially in this tough reality Poland faced, just like all our neighbors after Second World War. So the era of socialism, or what we can also call the communism, and that was very difficult, and especially for people coming from outside Central Europe, it is quite hard to believe, quite hard to imagine that it's only actually one generation, 27 years. 26, 27 years we live normally, with open market, with open minds, with open borders, and with open hearts for anything that is coming here. So that's quite important, and it's good to underline this very big courage of people in this central part of Europe, and not only in Poland but among the countries neighboring us, but also potential that is here. Building to our left-hand side, it is also creation of Antonio Corazzi, the same architect who made the Grand Theatre. It's a town hall of Warsaw. Here to the right is glass office building, glass tower. It's a blue building, the blue tower, that was one of the first skyscrapers built in the city after transition, so in 1997. Exactly here on this square was the very center of Warsaw's financial life. That's why the square is called the Bank Square. It is neighboring with a former Muranów district, so just in a moment when we cross Solidarity Avenue, we will be crossing the Avenue of Solidarity, named to the movement created by Lech Wałęsa, former president of Poland. We will be entering to this quite interesting, quite unusual district of the city, also very full of very tough history, as exactly here on spots where you can see all of these buildings, especially to the left, that are also very good examples of post-war socialistic architecture. There was the main center of Warsaw's ghetto, so the most terrifying place of the city, where number of Warsawians, number of Poles suffered pain, hunger. It was very, very tough reality in the ghetto of Warsaw, especially when we speak about the numbers. Nearly 500,000 people passed the ghetto of Warsaw. 300,000 of them were sent to Treblinka, to extermination camp. Many people, thousands, were involved in combat movements inside the ghetto. Many people were just dying because of mutations of viruses, because of hunger on the streets. So actually, streets of Muranów are poured with blood, and this district was built on the ruins of a former Jewish tradition. Today it is a very interesting source of knowledge, as every building, every corner is having different memorial. There are murals on the walls of many buildings bringing back histories, at least biographies of inhabitants of this part of the city. Driving in between the Chinese embassy to our left hand side, and actually just in a moment we'll drive along the Great Wall, or the Chinese Wall. It's exactly that part of fence to the left, and one of the gardens surrounding the old town, that's called Krasiński Garden, to the name of one of the aristocratic families that owned this property. We are entering to the old city of Warsaw, actually to the complex of Old and New Town. And Supreme Court, the building that's going to be above our heads just right now. So this huge construction above us, and to the left, Supreme Court, is something like a border between that what was the Aryan, Catholic and the Jewish side of Second World War Warsaw. This square itself is a very important place because exactly here was the entrance to last bastion of the city of Second World War. When you look to the left, you may see a monument of Warsaw Uprising, dedicated to over 220,000 Warsawians and 63 days of their fighting between 1st of August and 2nd of October 1944. Most heroic, most important for city's history period, and also one of the most important facts of Second World War, one of the biggest cities uprising of Warsaw. Buildings to the left, to the right are different educational and cultural institutions, also governmental, like we pass Ministry of Health to the right. There is Academy of Theatre, different museums, churches around this area, and actually we are driving around the old town. Everything to our left hand side, especially behind the buildings, it's a UNESCO site, Old Town of Warsaw, that was rebuilt with tiniest details from inside, from outside. Decoration of the building, interiors, plan, setup of buildings is exactly like it was when houses were originally built, and that was all completely reconstructed, fully reconstructed after these tough years of the war. We will slow down, and if you look to the left, you will see a building, the red building, that was a royal castle, a seat of the king of Commonwealth of both nations. This is how Poland was called for many centuries, not as we call it now, Polska. It was called Commonwealth of both nations of Poland and Lithuania, and actually our countries were united for a very, very long time and shared kings, shared history and land until the end of Second World War. Sometimes even Poles and Lithuanians don't realize how much we share. For example, when you look to your left hand side, you will see a monument of one of the greatest Polish or Lithuanian writer, Adam Mickiewicz. Mickiewicz was born in Vilnius. He had never visited Warsaw, never been to Krakow, but he was born in a town that was part of Poland. We passed building of the President's House and the Bristol Hotel. This is quite fancy, quite representative part of the city, and the street itself is called Royal Route, lined by palaces, churches, educational institutions like the University of Warsaw. We are going to pass in a moment. Monuments. This is that most representative street of the city, always full of color, rather full of people during Friday, Saturday nights, during some festivals, events. Good restaurants are here, good museums are around here, quite fancy shops, and this is the place where Warsawians, visitors really like to be, at least to learn about cities' inhabitants. Buildings to the left are main edifices of University of Warsaw. We are passing the main gate to campus of Warsaw's University to the left, and actually all this neighborhood is very strongly connected with quite important inhabitant of Warsaw, well known around the world, Frédéric Chopin. Chopin was born in a village nearby Warsaw. The village has very easy name for non-Polish speakers. It's called Żelazowa Wola. From now everyone will remember, everyone on board, for sure, it's a very easy name. And he raised here in Warsaw, so city of Warsaw is his place. He lived here, he was giving first concerts. Until today, Warsaw is a place that's hosting the biggest international Chopin music competition that takes place every 5 years. It's one of the most prestigious musical contests in the world. All of the buildings around this part of the railroad belong to the University of Warsaw, which was not only a place of education for Chopin, but also it was his father's place of work. And actually, the fact that Chopin shown up, his family was here in Warsaw, it was related with the fact that his father was a tutor at local university. Mainly because of this, Chopin's family became so connected with our city. Of course, these buildings that are today departments of university are former residences of wealthiest Warsawians, so aristocratic families, all of the noblemen of the city that owned these properties were the most influencing in Warsaw, and this line of aristocratic families was continued actually until the beginning of Second World War. During and after the war, many of aristocrats, many of these noble families had to leave our city, had to leave our country. Many of them settled in France, in the UK. Many of these people went much farther to North, South America or Australia. Until now, Poland seems to be one of the biggest nation of emigrants. So there is Polish blood almost everywhere, all around the world, and it's all related with quite tough historical reality of Central Europe, related with partitions, with both wars, with times of communism. So much was happening here within the last 200 years. We're talking, underlining just last 200 years, that it's really difficult to understand many moves of people. We would be leaving this Krakow's neighborhood, so the oldest part of the Royal Road, and we will pass farther along its extension, central part of Street of Kings, that's called the New World. New World because the architecture referring to what we have already seen is a little bit different, is more representing late 1600s, beginning of 1700s, also rebuilt, also reconstructed after these damages of Second World War, very frequently shown at different movies about the war, about post-war reality, about the old history of the city. Nowy Świat, or New World, it's a place where also Warsawians like to meet with their friends. They go for a party to some of these music clubs located around or behind the gates. They meet at the restaurants of different tastes around, so it's a really popular street of the city, and it goes farther toward the governmental district. So Royal Route, all entire street, entire avenue goes exactly along the river from north to the south, and parallel to the river, and makes one of these main connections between both most important sites of the city, governmental and historical. Just in a moment we are going to approach the roundabout of General Charles de Gaulle. who really loved Warsaw and lived here for a couple of years, had his apartment above one of the bakeries that was here. And what's quite unusual on this roundabout, if you keep looking left, you will see that in the middle of the roundabout, just where you can see the police cars blocking the bridge, we're just about the time. The football game, Poland versus Armenia, was finished, and all the fans will be entering to the city. We'll see whether they are very happy or upset. It looks like the result wasn't so good, because we don't see the fireworks. So probably it ended with draw. We are driving along previously mentioned Jerusalem Avenue, one of another very important streets of the city, symbolizing a way to New Jerusalem, first independent Jewish settlement created at the outskirts of Warsaw in the beginning of 1600s. Today being one of these major roads, passing just beneath the Palace of Culture, Central Railway Station, and going farther southwest toward the airport of Frederick Chopin, where we have all met today during a day. We will have another quite nice view at city's Manhattan, commercial center of the city, so Palace of Culture and Science, and all of these residential, financial, business centers of the city, commercial centers of the city. And we will be driving back toward the hotel. It's just 2-3 blocks from this stop where we are going to drop you. So after we stop, don't forget to take your umbrellas. You may drop it in the lobby. Don't forget to